The Ben 10 franchise was built on transformation, the premise that DNA could be accessed, encoded, and expressed in a living body as a different species' full biological identity. The Omnitrix did this safely, temporarily, and with protocols that ensured the user returned to their natural form after the transformation expired. Let's break this down. Kevin 11, the original hybrid. Kevin Ethan Levin was 11 years old when he first absorbed the Omnitrix energy in a subway car outside Bellwood. And the specific quality of what that absorption produced was the franchise's most dramatically staged single hybrid creation, a boy whose natural ability to absorb and channel energy met a device that contained the genetic information of 10 different alien species, the combination distributing all 10 species' physical capabilities across a single human body that had not been designed to contain any of them. The Kevin 11 form was visually the franchise's most impressive single hybrid design. Parts of all 10 original aliens visible across a single body, each alien's characteristic elements present but none of them complete. The combination producing something that was simultaneously the most powerful individual Ben had faced in the original series and the most obviously broken. Kevin could use Diamond Head's crystal projection and forearm strength and Heat Blast's fire and XLR8's speed and every other alien's abilities in combination, but none of the combinations were as efficient or as stable as Ben's dedicated alien transformations. The hybrid form being the franchise's most specific visual argument against the assumption that more power in a single form was automatically better than one form's focused capability. Kevin 11 had everything but nothing worked at full efficiency because the alien capabilities were competing for expression in a body that had not evolved to express any of them simultaneously. His natural ability to absorb energy, the mutation that had made his childhood in Bellwood dangerous, that had caused him to be treated as broken rather than different, was the specific property that had converted the Omnitrix's energy into a hybrid condition rather than simply a power-up, the absorption being indiscriminate in the way that natural abilities often were, taking everything the Omnitrix contained rather than the specific single alien the device's selector was supposed to provide. His subsequent imprisonment in the Null Void, trapped there at the end of Back with a Vengeance, spending years in the Null Void's hostile environment with a hybrid body that had no way of reverting to human, was the original series' most specific documentation of what uncontrolled hybrid creation cost the person who had experienced it. Not simply dangerous to others, but destructive to the person themselves, removing Kevin from the world he had been part of at an age when the world he had been part of had not been particularly kind to him. Kevin 11,000, the future that never came back. The most disturbing single hybrid in the franchise's original series run was not the 11-year-old Kevin 11, but his future self, the adult Kevin 11,000 who appeared in the Future Timeline episode Ken 10 as the villain that Ben 10,000's son Ken had to face alongside his father, the documented endpoint of what the hybrid condition became when it was given time and opportunity to continue accumulating without any intervention. Kevin 11,000 was what Kevin 11 had become after spending years in the Null Void absorbing the DNA of alien species imprisoned there alongside him. The hybrid condition's most extreme single documented expression in the franchise's original timeline. A being whose form had grown beyond the original 10 alien combinations into something that incorporated dozens of additional alien DNA contributions. Each DNA absorption in the Null Void had added another species capabilities to the accumulating biological complexity of a body that had never recovered from the initial uncontrolled absorption, the hybrid condition not stabilizing after the original Omnitrix energy contact, but continuing to develop as Kevin's absorption ability interacted with every alien species he encountered during his years of imprisonment. His physical scale in the Ken 10 episode communicated the endpoint of this process in the most direct visual terms available, a massive, multi-limbed, multi-featured creature whose specific form was the visual record of every DNA contact he had made across years of Null Void imprisonment, the hybrid condition's progression having moved so far from the original Kevin 11 form that the 11-year-old child who had absorbed the Omnitrix energy was only identifiable in the adult monster through the most careful attention to the original hybrid's specific features. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite hybrid in Ben 10. Let's get back into the video. DNAliens, the Highbreed's hybrid army. The Alien Force series introduced the franchise's largest single hybrid population in its central antagonist force, the DNAliens, human beings who had been infected by xenocytes, the cephalopod-like parasites distributed by the Highbreed, and had been transformed into human hybrid hybrids, whose specific biology placed them in the most involuntary single hybrid condition the franchise had ever staged. The xenocyte was a parasitic organism specifically designed by the Highbreed to serve as the DNA delivery mechanism for their infiltration program. Attaching to a human host, embedding hybrid genetic material into the host's cellular structure, and reshaping the host's biology around the Highbreed contribution until the result was a creature that served the Highbreed's agenda rather than its own. The DNAliens were the franchise's most systematic hybrid population precisely because the hybridization was the point of the Highbreed's operation rather than the unintended consequence of some other process. The Highbreed were using human biology as raw material for the production of a hybrid workforce, beings who retained enough human physical capability to operate in human environments while being reshaped at the genetic level toward Highbreed loyalty and service. The infected humans had no awareness of what had happened to them in the early stages of the xenocyte infection, their consciousness being gradually replaced by the Hybrid's loyalty to the Highbreed as the genetic transformation progressed. Ben's use of the Omnitrix to cure the xenocyte infection, one of the device's most significant non-combat deployments in the Alien Force series, was the franchise's most specific documentation that the hybrid condition the xenocytes produced was reversible if the right biological intervention was applied, the Omnitrix DNA manipulation capability being used to remove the Highbreed contribution from infected humans rather than to transform Ben himself. Ultimate Kevin, when the Ultimatrix broke him. The most personally costly single hybrid transformation in the franchise's history for the audience was Ultimate Kevin in the Ultimate Alien series, a character who had spent the entire Alien Force era rebuilding himself from the Kevin 11 trauma, who had become Ben and Gwen's most reliable ally and Gwen's boyfriend, and who was destroyed as a psychological entity by the Ultimatrix's catastrophic energy overload in the most devastating single setback to a character's recovery arc the franchise had ever staged. Kevin accidentally absorbed too much energy from the Ultimatrix, which caused him to lose his mind and turn into a monster again, the specific quality of the recurrence being what made it the series' most emotionally devastating single event. The Ultimate Kevin form was the franchise's most thorough deconstruction of the recovery that Alien Force had built across 3 seasons. Every alien form that Ben had used through the Ultimatrix was incorporated into a single body that expressed all of them simultaneously, the accumulation producing a hybrid condition that was simultaneously the most powerful Kevin had ever been and the most completely inaccessible Kevin had ever been as a recognizable person. The psychological component was the franchise's most specific communication about what the hybrid condition cost beyond the physical. Kevin's specific personality, the dry humor, the mechanical enthusiasm, the genuine care for Ben and Gwen that he expressed through protecting them rather than through sentiment, was gone in the Ultimate Kevin form, replaced by the pure aggression of a being operating entirely through the biological imperatives of dozens of alien species without any human psychological architecture to filter or direct those imperatives. His cure, achieved through the accumulated life energy donation of every alien whose DNA Kevin had absorbed, was the franchise's most emotionally complete hybrid recovery arc. Gwen Tennyson, the human Anodite hybrid. Gwen Tennyson was 1/4 Anodite, the specific biological heritage that explained the magical abilities she had been developing since the original series, whose expression as mana manipulation and energy generation were the surface manifestations of a deeper alien biology that the Alien Force era fully revealed for the first time, and that fundamentally changed the audience's understanding of everything she had done across the preceding years of the franchise. The Anodite were a species of pure energy beings from the planet Anodyne, non-corporeal in their full expression, capable of accessing and manipulating the mana that permeated the universe as the life energy underlying all biological existence. Gwen's grandmother Verdona was a full Anodite who had chosen to take physical form to be with Max Tennyson, and that choice had introduced Anodite genetics into the Tennyson family line in a diluted expression that manifested differently in each generation, Gwen's mother having less of the ability than Gwen, and Ben and his father having none of it at all. Gwen's specific manifestation was the franchise's most heroic hybrid condition, not a traumatic transformation or a parasitic infection, but a biological inheritance that she spent the Alien Force and Ultimate Alien eras learning to access intentionally. The girl who had been treating her alien heritage as magic when it was the expression of an entirely different biological relationship to the universe's fundamental energy. Her eventual ability to transition between human and anodite energy form was the franchise's most complete single hybrid capability development. The biological potential that had always been present reached through the specific combination of training, experience, and the willingness to understand what she actually was. Helen Wheels, the half-Kinesicelluran plumber's kid. Helen Wheels was half human and half Kinesicelluran. The species that Ben's XLR8 transformation represented, the lizard-like speedsters from Kinete, whose specific biology gave Helen the ability to run at extraordinary speeds and whose hybrid expression in her body had defined every significant aspect of her life since childhood. Helen's Kinesicelluran heritage was expressed through the speed capability most directly, the ability to move at velocities far beyond any unassisted human physical capacity. But the hybrid biology's expression in her specific body was not identical to the full Kinesicelluran biology that XLR8 represented. Where XLR8 was a pure Kinesicelluran whose tail, wheel-like feet, and full speed capability were the complete expression of the species' evolved biology, Helen's hybrid form was the human-filtered version of those same biological properties, expressed through a body that was partly human and whose human biology shaped how the Kinesicelluran capabilities were expressed. She had spent years fighting in the Null Void alongside the Magister before the Alien Force era reconnected her with Team Tennyson. The years of Null Void combat having given her the specific combat experience that the alien half of her biology had equipped her for, her hybrid speed being the capability that had kept her alive in an environment whose hostility required every advantage available. Her hybrid identity was the franchise's most positive single representation of what it meant to exist between two biological heritages. Not a complication of identity, but simply an identity whose specific capabilities had been demonstrated across years of practical application in one of the most demanding environments in the franchise's universe. Manny Armstrong, the half-tetramand plumber's kid. Manny Armstrong was half human and half tetramand, the species that Ben's four-arms transformation represented, whose four-arm strength-based biology had given Manny the most visually immediate hybrid characteristic of any plumber's kid in the Alien Force roster. The four-arms were the most specific single visible expression of the tetramand biology in Manny's hybrid form, the characteristic that made his hybrid status immediately legible to anyone who encountered him, and that had defined his childhood experiences in the same way that any visibly non-human characteristic defined the childhood of someone growing up in human spaces. Where four-arms was a full tetramand whose 12-foot height was as characteristic of the species as the four-arms themselves, Manny's hybrid form expressed the four-arm property without the full tetramand scale. A human-sized four-armed individual whose combat capability exceeded human norms through the tetramand strength contribution while remaining physically manageable in human environments that a full-size tetramand could not have navigated. His years fighting alongside Helen in the Null Void had given the tetramand strength contribution in his hybrid biology its most complete expression as practical combat capability. The four arms and the enhanced strength being the most useful properties a combatant could have in the Null Void's environment of constant threat from multiple directions simultaneously. Manny's specific characterization in the franchise was the characterization of someone who had never been given the opportunity to think of his hybrid status as anything other than simply what he was. A fighter whose biology was the biology he had, deployed in the service of the mission that had given his life its organizing purpose. The Highbreed, the species saved by hybridization, and the Highbreed were the Alien Force series' primary antagonist species and the franchise's most systematically developed anti-hybrid civilization, an ancient, immensely powerful species whose specific ideology of genetic purity had been the foundational principle of their civilization for millennia before the War of the Worlds brought them into direct conflict with the consequence of that ideology. They had spent generations refusing genetic contact with other species, pursuing an inbreeding policy so extreme that their own genome had become critically damaged by the genetic stagnation that purity required. The species that had built an empire on the philosophical premise that they were the universe's supreme life form had been in the process of dying from the specific damage that the isolation required to maintain their purity had inflicted on their genetic code. Their plan to terraform Earth by destroying its population was the plan of a species that had concluded its own extinction was approaching and had decided to ensure the universe was reshaped in their image before they disappeared. The most specifically tragic single villain motivation in the franchise's history. The Annihilators, who were also the Dying. Ben's resolution of the Highbreed conflict was the franchise's most specific single argument about the value of hybridization, using the Omnitrix to fuse the genetic material of multiple alien species with the Highbreed's damaged genome, repairing the stagnation damage by introducing the genetic diversity that the Highbreed's ideology had denied them. The Highbreed who survived were saved by becoming hybrid, their genetic code now containing contributions from dozens of species whose DNA Ben had introduced, the irony being the franchise's most elegantly constructed single-plot resolution. Mutant Kevin, the reboot's Antitrix hybrids. The 2016 reboot's Kevin created the Antitrix, a knockoff Omnitrix built from stolen schematics whose corrupted alien forms were hybrid versions of Ben's standard aliens, darker and more powerful and deliberately wrong in ways that the original Omnitrix safety protocols were specifically designed to prevent. The Antitrix hybrids were the reboot's most specific visual argument about the difference between the Omnitrix's managed transformation system and the uncontrolled combination that produced hybrid conditions. Each Antitrix form being a version of a standard Ben alien whose capabilities had been pushed past the biological parameters of the original species. The hybrid nature being expressed through visual design choices that communicated instability and excess rather than the clean, focused expression of a pure species. Hotshot was the Antitrix version of Heat Blast, fire capabilities amplified past Heat Blast baseline, the visual incorporating elements that the pure Pyronite biology did not contain. Wrecking Bolt was the Antitrix version of Cannon Bolt, the combination producing capabilities that exceeded the original species' performance parameters in ways the Omnitrix safety systems would have corrected. Dark Matter was the Antitrix version of Gray Matter, the diminutive genius twisted into something darker and more dangerous. Each Antitrix form communicated the franchise's most consistent hybrid theme. More power, without more control, was not an upgrade, but a liability, and the specific things the Omnitrix protocols prevented were prevented because the results of their absence, as the Antitrix hybrids consistently demonstrated, were less effective in the ways that mattered, while being more dangerous in the ways that didn't. Pierce Wheels, the half-human spiny hybrid. Pierce Wheels was one of the plumber's kids introduced in the Alien Force series alongside Helen and Manny, Helen's brother, a half-human hybrid whose alien biology came from a species characterized by the bioenergy spines that were his most immediately distinctive physical feature, and his primary combat tool. Pierce's spines were the most visually distinctive hybrid characteristic of any plumber's kit in the franchise. Sharp bioenergy projections that could be launched as ranged attacks are used in close combat, the alien biology's specific weapon system expressed through the hybrid body in a way that communicated immediately what the alien half of his heritage contributed to his combat capability. His hybrid status, like Helen's and Manny's, had been the defining fact of a life that had found its most meaningful context in the plumber mission, the specific biological capabilities that his hybrid nature provided being most valuable in exactly the combat environments that the plumber's work involved. Pierce's characterization in the franchise was the characterization of someone whose hybrid biology was most significant for what it could do rather than for the philosophical questions about identity and belonging that the franchise explored through other hybrid characters. A fighter whose alien heritage was most fully expressed through the specific combat capability it provided and whose relationship to that capability was the direct, practical relationship of someone who had been using it effectively for years. His inclusion in the Plumber's Kids ensemble alongside Helen and Manny communicated the franchise's most specific statement about hybrid identity in the most straightforward available terms. The combination of human and alien biology produced individuals whose specific capabilities were determined by which alien species was involved and how the combination expressed itself, and the variety across Helen, Manny, and Pierce was the franchise's documentation that hybrid was not a single condition, but a category as diverse as the alien species that contributed to each individual instance of it.